Hey folks, David Stewart here. Don't forget, Keys to Prolific Creativity is coming out March 27th. If you are looking to hone your creative process, get a little bit better at managing your time and getting the most productivity out of your time, bringing projects to completion, that book will hopefully have some good information in it for you. Very relevant to what I want to talk about today, which is this article that I've seen a couple of people sharing on social media. A dirty secret: you can only be a writer if you can afford it. Let me dig into this article and talk about what's going on here. I'm going to link it down below. You can read it for yourself. There's a lot of honesty in this perspective. There's a lot of insight in this article. I do want to let you know that there's some speech from, let's say the left spectrum politically about privilege or something like that. In the context of this article, I think it makes sense. So don't be too put off by the fact that the writer maybe doesn't share my political views or yours. The point of this article is quite honest, and I want to show a couple things and then provide just a little bit of insight in a different direction. So first of all, she says that she wouldn't be a writer if it wasn't for other people's money, that she has no undergraduate debt, this sort of stuff. I don't have any debt from school. My wife does have some student loans from her graduate schooling. And the reality is that gives you a lot of freedom. So before I go any further, not having a lot of debt gives you a lot of freedom to be poor enough to write, to be poor enough to be a musician, because the reality is it's very, very difficult to make money in the book business. And one of the things that she talks about, or several of the things she talks about in this article, is that a lot of people are basically phonies when it comes to saying that they're, quote, professional writers. If you're going to define professional writer as somebody who is making all of their income writing. And she points to a couple of examples. She doesn't call anyone out by name, which I respect. You don't want to spend your time like crapping on anybody or upsetting anybody or burning any bridges, because you kind of pull that veil off. But lots of writers like to masquerade as if they're highly successful, highly sought after authors that are making all kinds of money on their books. The reality is that's pretty rare, and not only is it pretty rare, but most of the authors that are making money just aren't making a whole lot. One of the things that's pointed out here is the medium income. That's the middle point, is $6,000. That's not a whole lot of money writing, but if you look at it as it's $500 a month extra money, which is kind of how I view my creative income. It's just kind of passive income that goes in and gets, I don't even touch the money that I make writing or the money I make from YouTube. So if you look at it as an extra $500 to what you're already making, it's a little bit easier to see that like that could be a good thing, rather than all of my income is $6,000. I'm putting all of my time into writing. And that's something I want to point out here, is because this perspective that's being represented in this article is that it takes all of this time and it takes all of this energy in order to write, that you need to be able to have like 8 hours a day to write, and you're only going to be able to do that, quote, if you can afford it. And that means if you have some other thing which is going to provide for your bills. Now, that is actually true. If you are looking to write for 8 hours a day, you have to have something else that's going to provide for your bills, because you're not going to make any money while you're writing a book. Success always comes after the work when it comes to creative output. You can only be successful once you complete the book, publish it, and sell it to people. You won't make a dime while you are writing something. That is reality. So there's a lot of truth to that. Now, how do I afford to write? Well, first of all, I have my life set up so that the income that I derive from writing or from producing YouTube videos, actually, I don't need to live on that. I'm married, and my wife works 4 days a week, and that provides for the income for the entire family. And I stay home with the kids during the day, and I do my creative work at night for a couple of hours. And I'll tell you that everything I do, last year I think I came out with 4 books. Actually, I published 5. One was that big Christmas collection that's in the background that you see sometimes, and the other 4 were new books. So I published those, and I did all of that work in about 2 hours a day, and a lot of times less because kids take up a lot of time. I have 2 kids under the age of 5. One was born last March. She's almost a year old now. And that's pretty intensive to take care of a baby, take care of a 4-year-old all day long. I really have no breaks. I actually had more time to write, would you believe it, when I worked full time. So before my wife and I switched what we were doing, she was staying home and I was working. Before we switched, I actually could work like 4 or 5 hours a day because of all the downtime that I had at work. I had this union negotiated lunch as a teacher. I just wrote through that. I had a prep period. A lot of times I had no work to do in that, so I just wrote. I had to stay in my classroom after school for at least an hour, so I wrote during that time. And I recorded podcasts with my brother-in-law on the way to work. So I got a lot of work done for a dude who was working full time. And trust me, it was full time. I was a band director, and a lot of times I had to stay till 12 o'clock at night. But even when I was doing that, there was always some gap of a couple hours where I could fire up a word processor and bang out 1,000 words, 2,000 words. I wrote the entirety of Water of Awakening in about 6 weeks, which is a 120,000 word novel. I wrote in about 6 weeks, and a really busy 6 weeks too. So I know how to do it on not a lot of time. And that's some of the things that I talk about in this book, Keys to Prolific Creativity, how to actually find the time and prioritize the time to be creative. If you're not making time for it, you won't be able to complete your projects. There's another bit of reality that, and by the way, this author's name is Lynn Steiger Strong, that she talks about in this article, which is just that you better be prepared to have a job if you want to be a writer. Everyone that I talk to on the channel that's like, I'm looking to be a writer, almost everyone already has a job. Like, they already accept that you have to start from a place where you're working and providing for your basic necessities. And only at some point in the future, once you've accomplished a lot creatively, are you going to be able to generate enough income, attention, and sell enough books to transition away from that. And what Lynn talks about in this article is lots of authors pretending that they don't do that, pretending that what they do is write all the time, when in reality they have to be getting a stipend from their parents or something. Maybe they're doing side gigs or they're teaching. I think this author is a teacher at a couple of different schools. They're working adjunct faculty. I did that when I was young. All of these things are very familiar to me, and that's kind of the reality of creative work, is that you actually have to put on a lot of hats. You have to be a teacher sometimes, be a performer sometimes. You have to be a writer sometimes, or maybe an editor. I know a lot of authors that supplement their incomes editing manuscripts for other newer writers, because it's really tough to make a lot of money just selling books. So I do want to point that out, and that there's a lot of truth. There's a lot of phonies in the business that will say that they make a ton of money when maybe they're leaving something out. Maybe their receipts, they're like, I made $50,000. It's like, you might have had $50,000 in revenue and you spent $40,000 on marketing, which means you only made $10,000. Now that $10,000 is really good, and I think that that's amazing that you can generate $50,000 in revenue, but you have to be honest with the total output. It's totally possible to make a living as a writer. What do you have to do to make a living as a writer, though? So this is going to be a little bit different perspective. Is you have to write a lot of books. You got to put books out. You have to write books that readers want to read. You have to know how to reach those readers and market to them. You have to know how to develop a following. All of it is a big business. You are running a business as a creative professional in the 21st century. You are not just writing a book and having a publisher put it out to the world and give you an advance. I believe that this author is totally in the traditional publishing lane, which that's what you're going to do, and you're going to be stressed out that it's really hard to make a buck doing that. If you're like me and you're just operating independently, not only do I operate independently, meaning I can go after whatever market I want to and act very agilely, because of the way I've set my life up, I can literally write whatever book I want to and not care too much about how much money it makes. The total business is what ends up actually generating my income. So I can gamble on every book, and I'm glad I gamble. So this book, Voices of the Void, has turned into my most popular book now. And it's turned into my most popular book basically because I gambled with it. I wrote a short book as an experiment. And there's no chapters in it, there's no chapter breaks, there's no scene breaks whatsoever, and there's only one character capable of speaking throughout this entire very tightly written novel, this sci-fi horror novel. And it ended up just people really attached themselves to the setting, to the way the character played out. They really, really enjoyed it, and I wouldn't have written this had I not felt like I had the freedom to write whatever I wanted to and not care about how much money I made on that particular book. Like, I didn't feel like I was going to lose my house if I wasn't successful with some book. And that is a big bit of freedom. It's a bit of freedom that I think a lot of authors long for. How did I arrange that? Well, keep your expenses low and figure out a way to prioritize your time so that you're making a lot of use out of a small amount of time. And that's really what I do. I have my time set aside to work, and I'm always trying to get the maximum value out of the time that I actually work so I can bring my projects to fruition. This author, I just looked around at her books, and it looks like she has 2 novels, one that still hasn't been released. So if you're one book deep into this game and you're also selling it for $9.99, it's tough to sell a lot of copies. If you're one book deep into this game, you're still pretty new. You're still pretty new at the game of selling books. And that's where everybody starts. You start with 1 or 2 books, and then it builds from there. And each time you write a book, you get better at writing the book. And each time that you come out with a book, you get better at marketing the book. You get better at publicizing it. One of the anecdotes that she shares in this article is an author that spent their entire advance on a publicist to get them on a talk show so that she could pretend to be a professional writer. There's a lot of people that like this idea of being an author, but they don't like the idea of working hard to be a writer. But I can tell you that if you do work hard and you work consistently and you come out with products and you have that growth mindset. I talk about this in the book. You're constantly growing. You're trying to get better. You're trying to learn your craft better. You're trying to get better at marketing. You're trying to get better at your business. And you have the professional mindset, which is you treat yourself as a professional. You expect to get paid. You expect to produce a good product. You expect to get respect from fellow artists. And you treat your endeavors like a business, meaning you're trying to make money at them. If you're doing those 2 things, then over time, yes, you can definitely build an income, a steady income doing this. But it's one of those things that if all of your hope hinges on 1 or 2 books, you could get really disappointed. So I have to push back against that thought a little bit for a lot of people. It takes a long time to build up your business as a creative professional to where you can even just have a modest passive income. And if you were to ask somebody, what would you do with an extra $6,000 a year? Most people, if they're working full time now, would be like, wow, $6,000 a year would be such a boon for me. I could buy a new car with that $6,000 a year, or I could put it into savings and save for something. I could take a really cool vacation with my family with that $6,000. So for most people, that medium published authors, that $6,000 is a lot of money. It's all about perspective. And if you look at it as passive income, something that's added on to what you normally do, then it's just gravy. It's just gravy. The problem is trying to approach this very early in your career. Like, how can anybody possibly make money writing books when I don't make any money writing books and I've come out with one? A lot of people have just a bad expectation that they're going to just jump into this, become an author, get published, make a bunch of money, and just spend all their time writing. And I'll be honest too, is that if I spent 8 hours a day writing, I wouldn't spend 8 hours a day writing. I've had time to spend 8 hours a day writing. You have to break it up somehow. You're going to end up wasting a lot of time out of boredom. It's really hard to focus for that amount of time. So one of the things in this headline, there's nothing more sustaining to long-term creative work than time and space. Well, I can tell you from being in the creative rat race for, at this point, like 20 years, what's really conducive to long-term creative work is doing it every day. It's prioritizing it and doing it. It's just doing it. So if you were to put this in another perspective, like what's sustaining to long-term fitness? It's like exercising really often. You don't spend 10 hours a day at the gym unless you're Mr. Olympia or something, and he probably spends just 4 hours a day at the gym. The rest of the time he's doing something else. He's resting or he's working on other parts of his business. So the idea that you're going to be able to make tons of money doing exactly what you want, doing exactly what you love is just not really true. It's a business. There's going to be parts of it that are tough. There's going to be parts of it where you got to learn. There's going to be parts of it where you have to grow, and that's all part of it. So that's really what I want to talk about with this. That's really what I want to point to. I want to read a little section here. I knew all these aspiring writers, though, heard this person say this and assumed that there was a way to make a living as a writer, that they thought that this person was making it in ways they hoped one day to be. I don't know this writer, and I don't know how actually they lived. What I do know is when the panel was over, I wanted to take the microphone back and say loudly to students that what this writer said was, at least in part, a lie. Let me read the previous paragraph because we need the context. So during this panel, the writer mentioned to the crowd that at one point they wrote and taught exclusively, and I kept my eyes on my hands folded in my lap. I knew this writer did much of the same teaching I did. Gig work, like the adjunct work. This is stuff that I did like really early on, like in my early 20s. Often for between $1,500 to $3,000 for a 6 to 8 week course. Nowhere near enough to sustain oneself in New York. That's true. I knew their whole advance was gone and that if the publicist did pay off, it would be months before they might accrue returns. This is part of the reality of the business mindset. It's like you have to you have to get returns on your time invested too. And the work comes first, the success comes after that. So what's most important? This is why I want to talk about this with my book here that's coming out on March 27th. What I want to talk about with this, the importance of this is really just that in order for you to be successful as an artist, you have to complete work. Not only do you have to complete work, you got to complete a lot of work. You can't be the person who publishes a book every 5 years and expect to somehow make it as a writer. You got to be publishing a book twice a year. And that's going to be that's not possible for everybody early on, but trust me, once you get better at this. So it takes a long time to write your first book. Your second book will come easier. Your third book will come easier. You just get better at it by doing it. So the key, I think, to long-term success is just grinding it out, practicing, getting better at your craft so that you can do it better and more efficiently each time. Each book you write will be better. That's that growth mindset that I talk about in the book. Keys to Prolific Creativity. It comes out March 27th. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and leave me your thoughts down below. And I'll see you guys next time.